I saw a short op-ed by former Secretary of State George Shultz in the New York Slimes today. And it's remarkable in many respects. Number one, the man is well into his 90s. Number two, he was a hugely successful Secretary of State who gave, in many respects, brilliant advice to President Reagan, among others. That is, among others, advising the president. And he was with the president all the time, as was Ed Meese, as were so many. So these people have contemporary memories of real time with President Reagan. And so he feels compelled to write this piece in the New York Times. I'm sure he has better things to do. The title is What Bill O'Reilly Gets Wrong About Ronald Reagan. You see, everybody at Fox is scared to death to criticize Bill O'Reilly because he's typically the highest rated show, but sometimes Megyn Kelly beats him. But the guy holds personal grudges. Run upstairs to the corporate executives and complain and try and get people prevented from coming on TV. But I don't really care anymore. Here's what Shultz wrote. Having served for almost 7 years as Ronald Reagan's Secretary of State, I reacted to Bill O'Reilly's and Martin Dugard's latest book, Killing Reagan, The Violent Assault That Changed the Presidency, with surprise and dismay and some alarm. The book, which currently occupies the #1 spot on the New York Times nonfiction bestseller list, portrays the president as a weakened man who struggled through almost 8 years in office with physical and intellectual limitations brought on by the brutal assassination attempt of March 30, 1981. And as I read this, I'm thinking to myself, where was Bill O'Reilly during this period? Was he doing a current affair? Was he a local news anchor? What was he? Shultz goes on, I am surprised because the Reagan depicted by Mr. O'Reilly and Mr. Dugard bears no resemblance to the man I knew and worked so closely with for years. This is what every one of these former cabinet secretaries and counselors and speechwriters are saying. And of course O'Reilly's response is that there's some kind of conspiracy out to destroy him and ruin his magnificent book because these people have skin in the game. They exist to defend Reagan. And many people who've worked for Reagan have attacked Reagan. They've written books critical of Reagan. And in none of those books that I'm aware of do they make the allegations that ghostwriter Bill O'Reilly and the real writer Dugard make, in my humble opinion. Shultz goes on, I am surprised because the Reagan depicted by Mr. O'Reilly and Mr. Dugard bears no resemblance to the man I knew and worked so closely with for years. I am dismayed because the book was co-written by one of the country's leading TV personalities, and I am alarmed because such a popular book may significantly damage the public's memory of one of our greatest presidents. I was as close to President Reagan as anyone in his administration. Before I became Secretary of State in July 1982, I was chairman of his Economic Policy Advisory Board. We met 6 times in his first year in office. As Secretary of State, I attended nearly every National Security Council meeting with President Reagan, missing only a few when I was out of the country. I also met with the president twice a week, just the two of us, to review our strategy, our progress, and our next moves. I would defer to no one on my understanding of Reagan's abilities during his presidency, whether it involved his policies, the changes he formulated for the American economy, the skills and strategy and negotiations he used to bring the Soviets to the bargaining table, or his understanding of complex political situations at home and abroad. Which is why the idea that the assassination attempt killed him, quote unquote, even metaphorically, rings so false. To claim that President Reagan suffered debilitating mental or physical damage, as the authors of Killing Reagan would have one believe, belies the medical facts and everything we know about his acumen and physical vigor. That's not to say the assassination attempt didn't set him back for a time. Of course it did. But despite being shot in the chest, he bounced back quickly. If anything, the attempt gave him renewed confidence and strength in his dual purposes, to rebuild America's economy and its military, so that the United States could bring the Soviets to the bargaining table and negotiate from a position of strength on the wide range of issues between our two nations, from nuclear weapons to the future of Europe. Shultz goes on. I could go on at length over what Killing Reagan leaves out in order to make its historically inaccurate point. The book does the president and his achievements a great disservice in reporting virtually nothing of his accomplishments during his second term, such as the sweeping 1986 Tax Reform Act or the Canada-United States Free Trade Agreement, and it attributes what he did accomplish to the inspiration of the Soviet challenge, as if he were merely reacting to events instead of driving them. But the biggest historical fault committed by killing Reagan was its slighting of his efforts on disarmament. By 1988, when we met with Soviet leaders in Moscow to put the finishing touches on the START Treaty, which was to bring about a 50% reduction in the strategic ballistic missiles on both sides, we already held 3 major summit meetings with the Soviets. We didn't quite finish the START Treaty, though it was signed 3 years later by Reagan's successor, George H.W. Bush. In Washington in December 1987, we signed the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, which eliminated an entire class of nuclear weapons on both sides. President Reagan was fully engaged in every detail of the planning and execution of these complex undertakings, and yet very little of this appears in killing Reagan. Early in his presidency, Reagan presented the world with a challenge, what he often called a dream, the prospect of eliminating nuclear weapons. He committed his entire presidency to it, and his achievements speak for themselves. Among the many measurements of his success, the number of nuclear weapons in existence today is about 1/3 the number at the time of the 1986 Reagan-Gorbachev meeting in Iceland, where the 2 leaders agreed on the goal of eliminating nuclear weapons. To ignore the progress President Reagan made in achieving major arms control treaties by patient negotiation, not in spite of, but perhaps even because of, his early near-death experience, distorts history. But even more, it distorts the gratitude the world owes to our 40th president. George P. Shultz was Secretary of State from 1982 to 89. Now, I've heard it said that some of us longtime traditional conservatives who helped get Reagan nominated and elected, I've heard it said that we treat Reagan like a demigod. A demigod, G-O-D. That is a lie. The man had imperfections and he had faults. Very few, I might say, certainly on the public record. He was a tremendous president, particularly when you look at who and what has come subsequently to him, particularly when you look at his accomplishments across the board. For any conservative, any constitutionalists, to try and trash his agenda, to try and trash his record, is to trash constitutionalism and conservatism generally. He wasn't a dictator. He had to deal with a Congress. He had to deal with courts. He had to deal with a hostile bureaucracy, loaded up with leftists, hostile to his agenda. He had to deal with an extremely hostile media, and yet look at his accomplishments. The most conservative president, not only in modern American history, one of them ever. And I spent 8 years working in that administration, and I despise what Bill O'Reilly has done. I despise his smear book, concocted, developed, with he and his lawyer co-author. This is a reason why some people have had some courage to speak out. But he's a very powerful man on the Fox News channel. He has a lot of control. He makes a lot of effort to influence who the guests might be, or who the contributors might be, if you dare to cross the man. This is the truth, the absolute truth. To write a book like this, which is a flat-out smear, we've had historians come out and say that, of different stripes. I think I read a piece, I think it was 4 historians to come out, all in one op-ed, to say the same thing. Somehow there's always something nefarious afoot. Somebody always has another agenda. Somebody's been bought and paid for. Somebody's been sold. But never Bill, the man of the people, the man of the folks. One book after another, after another, after another. Killing this one and killing that one and killing the next one. Revealing facts that we never knew before about Jesus. Tens of thousands of books written by brilliant researchers and scholars about Jesus, but Bill and Dugard, they found stuff nobody ever heard of before. Wow! And here we are, thousands of us, who worked for and with President Reagan. Some of us who actually worked with President Reagan, who knew President Reagan. Somehow there's something wrong with us, and we don't know what we're talking about. Or we've got all kinds of deals going on and conflicts going on. or we're just too damn loyal. Unlike Bill and Dugard, who are obviously writing these things because they're altruistic, not for money. It's just time to say enough is enough. This Christmas season's coming up. People are promoting their books. There are many, many wonderful books out there. There truly are. Wonderful books written by people I don't even like. That's beside the point. You can open your minds to a whole new world out there. You can learn so much out there. You can enjoy what you're reading. But don't be taken for fools. There are great books on Ronald Reagan out there. There's a great one out there now on the Reagan legacy by our dear friend Craig Shirley, who's written several books on Reagan, is a real historian. And he uses the scholarship that historians use to write about people. I know of no historian or scholar who would purposely not interview a single person who worked closely with the entire subject of their book. And then you digest what these people say, and you make a determination of whether you think it's believable or not. But willful ignorance to advance an agenda is unacceptable. And then to paint yourself as a victim, being attacked by this whole, conspiracy of Reaganites and conservatives and so forth. That's pathetic. The whole enterprise is pathetic.